April 19, 2017. The cold morning light crept through the narrow window of cell 57 as corrections officers entered and made a discovery that would stun the sports world forever. Aaron Hernandez, the former New England Patriots tight end who held a $40 million contract, was found hanging from a bed sheet secured to his cell window. But this was not simply another prison suicide. This moment marked the final chapter of a man whose collapse from fame had become one of the most disturbing stories in modern sports history. What most people never fully understand is that the 3 years leading to that morning were far more brutal than any death sentence could ever be. Behind steel doors and concrete walls, Hernandez endured isolation, paranoia, and psychological pressure that eroded his identity day by day. Stay with me, because what I am about to reveal about his prison existence will show you exactly why some fates are worse than death itself. By the end of this video, you will understand how life behind bars became a relentless nightmare that ultimately broke a feared NFL star. Aaron Hernandez did not enter the Massachusetts correctional system as an ordinary inmate. He arrived carrying the weight of a fallen empire, a name every guard and prisoner already recognized. This was a man who once lived inside stadiums filled with noise and worship, who moved through private jets and gated mansions, who believed the world bent itself around his talent. That illusion ended the moment the judge's gavel struck and sealed him into a life sentence for first-degree murder. In a single sound, the future he imagined vanished. What replaced it was not justice or closure, but a reality far darker than the public ever understood. After sentencing, Hernandez was transferred to Sousa Baranowski Correctional Center, a maximum security facility designed less for rehabilitation and more for containment. Sousa was known among inmates and legal advocates as a place that drained people slowly. Its architecture was cold and intentional. Long concrete corridors, endless cameras, harsh fluorescent lighting that never truly rested. It housed men with nothing left to lose, lifers and gang members who measured survival in dominance and fear. For someone like Hernandez, whose crimes and fame had been broadcast nationwide, this environment was uniquely dangerous. His cell measured roughly 7 by 10 feet, a concrete box stripped of comfort. Inside sat a metal bunk welded into the wall, a combined sink and toilet, a narrow writing surface, and a stool bolted permanently to the floor. Every edge was designed to prevent modification. Every object reminded him that nothing belonged to him anymore. The only personal item he could purchase was a small television, cheap and fragile, a hollow substitute for the massive screens and luxury rooms he once occupied. The contrast was brutal and unavoidable. What tormented him most was not the size of the cell, but the time. At Sousa, inmates like Hernandez spent close to 20 hours a day locked inside their cells. 20 hours of stillness, isolation, and relentless thought. The remaining hours were rationed into meals, brief showers, and limited recreation. Even then, movement was controlled, watched, restricted. For a man who had lived his life in motion, sprinting across open fields under roaring crowds, the confinement was suffocating. Each day felt identical to the last, a loop without variation or escape. When he left his cell, the pressure did not ease. Recreation meant pacing alone in another enclosed space, surrounded by concrete walls topped with razor wire. Other inmates watched constantly, evaluating him, studying him, waiting for weakness. His fame did not protect him. It made him visible. In prison culture, visibility attracts challenge. A fallen celebrity is not admired. He is tested. Every movement became a calculation. Every interaction carried risk. Sousa Baranowski was built to punish. Its sterile design, rigid schedules, and constant surveillance were meant to strip inmates of individuality. Comfort was not a consideration. Dignity was not preserved. For Hernandez, this systematic erasure was especially devastating. He had defined himself through status and control. Inside Sousa, he possessed neither. The institution made sure he understood that reality every hour of every day. But the physical environment was only the foundation of his suffering. From the moment he entered, a target had been placed on his back. Other inmates knew his story. They knew his money. They knew his past power. In a world governed by dominance, that combination made him a symbol that needed to be reduced. He could not be allowed to believe he was different. He could not be allowed to stand apart. From the first weeks, Hernandez lived in constant alertness. Sleep came lightly. Silence felt threatening. Every sound carried meaning. A shout in the distance. A door closing too slowly. A look held a second too long. The psychological strain was relentless. Unlike inmates with release dates, Hernandez faced decades of the same existence. He was only 25 years old when sentenced. That meant potentially 50 more years inside these walls. The knowledge alone was crushing. Each morning brought the same realization. This was forever. The pressure inside Souza Baranowski did not remain abstract for long. It manifested in violence almost immediately. Within months of his arrival, Hernandez became involved in his first physical confrontation. It occurred early one morning in May of 2015, inside his cell, when another inmate decided to test him. By the time a correctional officer arrived for routine rounds, the cell door was blocked. When guards forced entry, they found fresh red marks across Hernandez's knuckles and elbows. The message was clear. The former star had responded with force. This incident marked the beginning of a pattern. Over the next 2 years, Hernandez accumulated an astonishing 78 disciplinary violations connected to 12 major incidents. These were not minor rule breaks. They were violent encounters, possession of contraband, and behavior that signaled instability. 3 separate fistfights were officially recorded. Officers later discovered a nearly 6-inch sharpened metal weapon hidden inside his cell. Each violation reinforced the same conclusion. Hernandez was not adapting. He was unraveling. Guards described him as volatile. During routine interactions, he shifted rapidly between charm and hostility. At times, he manipulated officers for small advantages, extra food, minor favors, subtle privileges. Other times, he appeared disoriented, agitated, disconnected from his surroundings. When disciplined, his responses were defiant and chilling. He dismissed the prison itself, claiming it meant nothing to him, insisting he would dominate the environment rather than submit to it. The bravado sounded convincing on the surface. Underneath, it concealed fear and fragmentation. The reality was that Hernandez's mind was deteriorating. Years of collisions on the football field had left him with severe chronic traumatic encephalopathy, a degenerative brain disease that progressively destroys neural function. Medical researchers would later describe his brain damage as among the most severe ever documented in someone so young. The frontal lobes, responsible for impulse control, emotional regulation, and judgment, were deeply compromised. Inside prison, the symptoms became impossible to ignore. Hernandez suffered frequent migraines so intense they left him immobilized for hours. His memory began to fail. Conversations vanished from his awareness. Time blurred. He struggled to track days, sometimes even moments. Emotional regulation collapsed. Minor provocations triggered explosive reactions. Violence erupted without clear cause. Combined with the constant pressure of prison life, his condition created a perfect storm. Other inmates noticed. They exploited it. Challenges escalated. Tests became more aggressive. Hernandez could not afford to back down. In prison hierarchy, refusal to respond invites predation. Each confrontation he survived reinforced his reputation as dangerous, but also ensured future challenges. Survival demanded constant readiness. Exhaustion followed. In June of 2016, Hernandez became involved in another violent altercation outside his cell. The response from administration was swift. He was removed from general population and placed into disciplinary detention. This was solitary confinement in its harshest form. For 5 consecutive days, he was locked alone in a concrete box with no meaningful human contact. Meals were slid through a slot. Voices were reduced to orders. All visitation privileges were revoked for 45 days. The isolation intensified his psychological decline. Solitary confinement magnified symptoms of CTE. Disorientation deepened. Anxiety spiked. Sleep fractured. When released back into the unit, the cycle resumed. Other inmates targeted him with psychological warfare. Insults traveled through ventilation systems. Sleep was disrupted deliberately. Noise, flooding, and constant provocation became tools. These actions were calculated. They were designed to break identity, to force submission, to remind him that his past meant nothing. Fame did not survive here. Money did not matter. Only dominance did. Hernandez understood that reality too well. Every day demanded performance. Strength without hesitation. Weakness punished instantly. What made the torment unbearable was its permanence. There was no countdown, no release date. Every confrontation carried long-term consequences. Victory created resentment. Loss invited attack. Even guards viewed him primarily as a threat to be managed. Human connection disappeared. Silence consumed his cell. Sleep became rare. His damaged brain struggled against constant stress. The nightmare did not pause. It repeated endlessly. As months turned into years, the isolation and violence reshaped Aaron Hernandez entirely. The man who once thrived on structure and athletic discipline now existed in a state of constant psychological defense. Each morning began with the same realization. Nothing had changed. Nothing would. His world was reduced to concrete, steel, and surveillance. The repetition hollowed him out. Meaning dissolved. Identity fractured further with every passing day. The prison environment fed on his instability. Other inmates recognized that he could not disengage from conflict. Provocation always produced reaction. This made him predictable. Insults escalated. Threats multiplied. Games were played to test his response time, his emotional threshold, his willingness to fight. Sleep deprivation became a weapon. Noise echoed through the unit at all hours. Water flooded cells deliberately. Officers intervened only to restore order, never to protect dignity. Hernandez's mental health deteriorated rapidly. Migraines intensified. Emotional volatility increased. He swung between arrogance and despair, confidence and confusion. Guards reported moments where he seemed detached from reality, staring blankly, muttering to himself, struggling to follow simple instructions. Other times, he appeared sharp and calculating, fully aware of how to manipulate situations to his advantage. These fluctuations alarmed staff. They indicated neurological decline rather than intentional defiance. Medical attention was limited. Prison healthcare addressed symptoms, not causes. Headaches were treated. Behavioral incidents were disciplined. The underlying disease progressed unchecked. Chronic traumatic encephalopathy does not stabilize. It worsens. Inside a maximum security prison, there was no space for vulnerability.
Admitting weakness invitait danger.
Hernandez learned to mask pain behind aggression. The weight of permanence crushed him. Unlike death row inmates who anticipate an end, Hernandez faced decades of repetition. Every year stretched endlessly forward. The knowledge eroded hope. Small comforts lost meaning. Television became background noise. Letters felt distant. Family visits, when permitted, only reinforced loss. Each goodbye reopened wounds. The prison had stripped him of autonomy, status, and future. All that remained was survival. Survival demanded constant vigilance. It demanded violence. It demanded suppression of fear. Over time, the effort exhausted him. Emotional numbness replaced rage. Moments of clarity were followed by crushing despair. The silence of his cell became oppressive. The walls felt closer. The air heavier. In the final months, guards noticed changes. Hernandez withdrew further. Conversations shortened. Eye contact faded. He spent longer periods staring at nothing. The bravado diminished. The challenges continued, but his responses slowed. The body remained strong. The mind weakened. Inside cell 57, the routines never changed. Count, lockdown, meals, silence. The structure that once disciplined him now imprisoned him. Thoughts spiraled inward. Regret surfaced. Confusion deepened. The damage to his brain distorted perception, magnifying hopelessness and impulsivity. On April 19, 2017, the system discovered what it had been moving toward for years. A man trapped inside an environment designed to punish, burdened by irreversible neurological disease, stripped of future, identity, and relief. had reached the end of his capacity to endure. The cell bore witness to the final consequence of prolonged isolation, untreated brain trauma, and psychological erosion. The public would debate his guilt, his character, his legacy. But inside those walls, the reality was simpler and far more brutal. Prison did not rehabilitate him, consumed him. The environment amplified his worst damage and offered no escape. For Hernandez, the sentence was not just life without parole. It was a slow dismantling of the self. So, here we reach the final truth about Aaron Hernandez's prison existence. This was not simply a man paying for his crimes. It was a slow unraveling of someone who had already lost everything that once gave his life meaning. The concrete walls, the unrelenting violence, the constant psychological pressure from other inmates, and most devastatingly, the knowledge that his own mind was failing him every single day. When officers found him hanging inside that cell on April 19, 2017, they uncovered a reality many still refuse to accept. This was not cowardice nor an escape. This was the final surrender of a man who endured nearly 3 years of mental punishment that would have broken most people long before. The 27-year-old who died that morning had lived through an existence that truly was worse than any execution. His story stands as a reminder that some punishments extend far beyond any sentence a courtroom can deliver. The collision of brain damage, relentless confinement, isolation, and the absence of hope created a storm no human being could survive forever. There is no redemption inside such a system built to erase souls completely. Until next time, remember every decision carries consequences, and sometimes those consequences are worse than death itself.